This is another Patreon request. The concept is pretty self-explanatory, so let's jump right into it. First off, even though the gender balance is more uneven, I decided to put Fiore on the Screaming Gophers and Junior on the Killer Bass, since those two teams provide much more interesting character dynamics for both of them. All the original character intros would be the same. Fiore would purposefully present herself as timid and naive to those around her like in the original, which she would be able to sell even more as she could come in right after Heather. Junior would be really excited to finally be away from his overprotective dad and hang out with the cooler older kids. When Duncan makes his introduction, Junior is like, whoa, and thinks he's super cool. When Bridget comes in, Junior would immediately develop a crush on her, and he and Jeff would both awkwardly greet her without really noticing each other. Junior was in love with Carrie, who shares blonde hair, a similarly mostly laid-back personality with situational clumsiness and anxiety, and also the same voice actress. Hence why I think he'd fall for Bridget now. When Chris says all the campers are 16 years old, he stops himself and says, well, except for Junior who's 11 and Fiore who's 8. I think maybe they got on the wrong show, chuckling at his snarky remark. Junior has a confessional worried everyone will look at him as just a little kid, and he feels like he needs to prove himself by not getting kicked too early, and also using this as an opportunity to make new friends who are older so he can prove how mature he is. Fiore is enraged by Chris's comment, which he only reveals in confessional. Fiore and Junior are both disgusted by the food, like everyone else, and they both stand shocked along with everyone else up on the cliff at the end of the episode. Junior would jump as it was proven in his season that he's not going to shy away from a big cliff jump. Fiore on the other hand chickens out as she refused the cliff dive and only technically went when Miriam threw her off. However, that was during the Final Four challenge where the stakes were much higher, and Fiore's cruelty was already well established by that point. Whereas here, no one would be stupid enough to throw an 8-year-old girl off a cliff since that's social suicide. On top of being, not very nice. Courtney, DJ, and Beth also still don't jump, while everyone else does. This means 2 members of each team chicken out, so the first part of the challenge is a draw and no one gets the wheelbarrow advantage. And because of that, I actually think the Killer Bass win. Mainly because even from the beginning, that team had a lot more synergy, and they have a lot of muscle like DJ, Eva, and arguably Duncan, which should give them enough of a lead to win this one. Because now they'd have time to build the hot tub and not rush as much to beat the other team. Junior would be eager to contribute, but Courtney wouldn't want to give him too much responsibility since he's so young. Junior gets angry and tells her, says the girl who didn't jump. The two butt heads until Duncan intervenes and tells them both to shut their yappers and get back to helping him with the hot tub. Fiore doesn't really do much except lay low. She notices that Heather seems to be the smartest and most devious player on her team, which she sort of admires. Even though they won, Ezekiel still says his version of Lamau woman moment, only now in the form of saying that their victory is unsurprising since they have 7 guys and only 5 girls, which still gets him in hot water. Junior would actually join in on the public shaming since he would genuinely think what Zeke said is uncool, as when his dad was talking about women's roles back in the day, he clearly knew it was whack, and plus he'd view this as a way to make headway with the ladies. Now since the Screaming Gophers lose this time, they're sent to elimination, which comes down to either Beth or Fiore, since they were the only chickens. Of course, Fiore knows this and isn't going down that easily, so she talks to Heather and convinces her to get Beth out. Heather asks why she would bother saving her, and Fiore asks her if she really wants a dweeb like Beth on her team, or if she wants to keep the only other interesting person in the game and have some fun, which wins her over. Even though this is before Heather made her alliance, she already started talking to Lindsay this episode, and while the other 9 votes besides Beth herself are up in the air, they hatch a plan that involves Heather calling a quote-unquote team meeting to decide who's getting voted off, with Beth and Fiore obviously in the hot seat. Beth points the finger at Fiore, saying she's less useful because of her Asian size, giving Fiore the perfect excuse to fake cry and run off, turning everyone against Beth and making the vote 11-1 against her. So Beth is eliminated and Fiore and Heather smirk at each other, knowing this is the start of something really cool. So this episode, Heather still has the plan to create an alliance of gullible lackeys, only this time it would also include Fiore, who's obviously in on it, and the 2 suckers would be Lindsay and Owen, who are both ecstatic about hearing Heather's plan to get all of them to the Final Four. This works out even better for Heather than in the original, because now if she gets accused of being a bitch, Fiore can pretend like she and Heather were victims of bullying or something and turn everyone against whoever they need to. After all, if it worked once, why not again? Meanwhile, on the Killer Bass, Junior would talk to Bridget and tell her how cringe and bad Ezekiel's sexist comment was, and says he thinks Bridget is actually the strongest one on the team. Bridget chuckles and thanks Junior for the compliment. During the challenge, Junior tries to emulate Duncan by staying up late past his bedtime, but it doesn't work as both he and Fiore are out earlier than everyone else except Owen. Everything else plays out the same between Gwen outlasting Duncan and the Gophers winning immunity, Heather stealing Eva's MP3 player, getting her to go sicko mode, and subsequently getting voted out. Even though they still wouldn't like Ezekiel, most of the guys wouldn't care enough about what he said, and the girls would be more scared of Eva than they are of Zeke, who's much less of an active problem. The only two people who vote for Zeke are Eva herself and Junior, who's still trying to impress the ladies. The other 10 votes are gunning for Eva. The dodge brawl match doesn't really change all that much, honestly. Neither Zeke nor Junior contribute all that much despite Junior's best efforts, and Fiore replacing Beth also makes no difference. Harold still ends up taking the W over Owen. I think DJ might pull Junior aside and say, while it's great he wants to be a team player, he doesn't want to see Junior sabotage himself by screwing over the team by forcing himself into the game too much, and that it's better to play it smart. Junior thanks DJ for having his back, and in confessional says it's nice to get that sort of sagely advice, since when his dad tries giving him advice like that, it usually involves some weird metaphor or lame story. The Gophers are sent to elimination yet again, and this time Heather's alliance doesn't need to do anything since Noah's snarky non-participation gets him eliminated just like in canon, probably unanimously. Ezekiel would comment how the men carried the team once again, pointing to Harold winning it for them to back up his claim, upsetting all the women and some of the guys. Harold corrects Ezekiel stating while his mad skills are very manly and powerful, it is also possible for women to acquire such prowess as well, citing his mother as a prime example. Bridget asks Ezekiel what his oh-so-manly self did to help their team's last challenge, which he just says his manly charm speaks for itself, and says he'll prove it by volunteering in the talent show by rapping. Obviously, Ezekiel sucks, but it doesn't matter since Harold once again performs peak verbalise moment, and everything else in the challenge, including the diary reading and stuff, stays the same. So the Bats go to elimination again. Now, originally Heather said she needed 4 votes to get rid of Justin, on top of her own. Obviously, she still gets Lindsay and Owen. Somehow she convinced Izzy originally, so she still does that, I guess. Beth isn't here anymore, but Fiore is, so that still gives them 5 votes. The thing is, there's still 5 other people on the team who clearly didn't all vote for Heather, otherwise the vote would have been a tie. But Gwen, Trent, Lashana, and Cody have all the reason in the world to vote for Heather. So the best I could come up with was just that someone convinced Justin to vote for someone else by playing up his cockiness. I mean, maybe that's why he looked so confident at the bonfire. Honestly, I'm not sure. But because Heather has the same number of votes as she did in the original, I'm gonna say she still manages to get Justin out. Everything on Team Gopher stays pretty much the same. On the Killer Bass, Duncan tells a scary story foreshadowing the chainsaw killer with a hook, which frightens everybody. Junior tries to follow it up with an even scarier story about a spooky ghost who hides under someone's bed and never leaves, but is met with crickets across the campfire. Duncan laughs and pats Junior on the head saying, well, at least you tried, and everyone else goes to sleep. Bridget and DJ wake up in the middle of the night again while Junior can't sleep, and when Bridget goes outside the tent, Junior offers to keep her company just to be lookout. Bridget says it's okay, but Junior insists, so she says okay. When the bats come for Bridget, Junior tells her to watch out, but one of them still blinds her. Junior tries to catch her, but she just trips over him, which still accidentally causes the tent to burn down. Junior has a confessional, afraid that one of them is going to get voted out now, which sucks because he hasn't told her how he feels yet. But of course that doesn't matter because of Katie and Sadie getting lost and coming back after the other team the next morning. Now, originally Katie gets voted off for getting lost, but I have a feeling Ezekiel would also get lost in a completely different spot from Katie and Sadie, and would only find his way back a little bit before Katie and Sadie, but still long after everyone else on both teams crosses the finish line. So since the bad sense of direction cancels out, the 4 girls on the team plus Junior and DJ would both be way more annoyed at Ezekiel for being sexist, and just more annoying in general since Katie and Sadie mostly keep to each other, whereas Ezekiel inserts himself into social situations where he's clearly not welcome all the time. So in a 6-5 vote, Ezekiel is eliminated. Fiore's fear was moose riding in Disventure Camp, so she does that here, which she clears. Katie has the same fear of bad haircuts as Lindsay and Sadie, so she also clears. And Junior's fear is, I don't know, wearing a dorky outfit all day or something. I'm pretty sure he passes too. So the point difference doesn't really change, and Courtney blows it for her team with the green jelly. And I don't really think Junior's vote changes the outcome here. Even though he doesn't like Courtney, he'd probably also think the chicken fear is really lame, so he might vote that way anyway. But even if he doesn't, I have a feeling that like Duncan, DJ, Courtney, etc., basically everyone else who voted for Tyler in the original will be enough to get him out here anyway. Fiore and Heather take a canoe together to talk strategy, though the details are left purposefully ambiguous to the viewer at this time. Because Katie is still here, she would obviously ride with Sadie on the canoe to Bonely Island, so I decided Junior would now take Sadie's place, riding along with Duncan and Harold, since he wanted to grab 2 people anyway. And even though Junior would want to go with Bridget, he doesn't want to turn Duncan down because he looks up to him and is also simultaneously intimidated by him. Duncan would tell Junior to pick up the pace paddling, and even though Junior says, yeah, sorry, on it, Duncan notices his head isn't in the game as he looks off into the distance. Duncan yells at him to focus, which puts Junior on edge, saying, okay, geez. And after that, Duncan has a confessional stating he feels bad, saying, alright, maybe I was too harsh on the kid. After all, he's less of a pain in the butt than Harold is, at least. who's the other person on their canoe. Duncan then switches to a much kinder demeanor and asks Junior what's wrong. At first he says it's nothing, but since Junior looks up to Duncan, he eventually does tell him it's about a girl. Duncan looks at him suspiciously, which gets Junior to clarify that it's not Courtney, which Duncan pretends like he doesn't care about. And after that, he uses the process of elimination by looking over at Katie and Sadie yapping on a nearby canoe, implying it's definitely not either of them. So Duncan is able to correctly guess that Bridget is the one Junior has a crush on, which he admits is true. Junior begs Duncan not to tell anyone, which he agrees to and threatens to beat Harold up if he says anything either, which makes Junior happy because it shows him Duncan has his back in a weird sort of way. And no, neither of them know about Bridget and Courtney's conversation, nor DJ and Jeff's. The only other thing that really changes here is that Beth is no longer here to take the tiki from Boney Island, and neither Fiore nor Junior are unreceptive or stupid enough to make the same mistake she did by taking it. And since everyone else was there when Chris told them it was bad luck, nobody would take it with them after the challenge. Everything else after that is pretty much the same, including Izzy running away from the authorities. Because Beth isn't here, she wouldn't open the bag of chips out of spite towards Heather and leave behind the trail of chips that led to Cody getting mauled by a bear. So Cody avoids getting injured now. Now, it would be Heather and Fiore bossing around Lindsay and Owen to get them chips instead. But they're either too stupid or hungry to follow their orders correct, because Lindsay thought they said tips, which she claims she did by looking for clues. When Lindsay's asked how she could have believed that, because what would the clues even be about, she tells them, I don't know, I assumed it was a surprise. Meanwhile, Owen just ate the entire bag and otherwise just goes off on his own. And from then on, he basically does the same thing as in the original, with DJ shoving him off the cliff. Junior asks Duncan for girl advice, and Duncan tells Junior straight up he's probably too young for Bridget, but if he really wants to know, the best thing to do is be nonchalant and don't act like you care too much, which Junior takes to heart. And even though Beth and Heather don't shoot each other with paint, the Screaming Gophers still lose because they're still just outgunned, and Heather's defenses aren't good enough to stand up to the killer bass. So, without Cody's injuries or Beth's presence to block her from the vote, Heather and Fiore know they're in danger. And even with their alliance, that's still only half the votes. On top of that, there's no way Gwen, Trent, or Lashana are flipping because they all hate Heather's guts. So they decide their best bet is to try to trick Cody into switching to their side, and voting off Trent by using his crush on Gwen. But Cody actually sees through this scheme, since last episode he helped Gwen and Trent get together despite being into her, because he knew they were into each other. And also, despite not always having the most solid social game, Cody is a surprisingly logical and perceptive person when push comes to shove. Hence why he was able to do what he did last episode, not to mention saving people from the quicksand, dealing with Sierra and World Tour, etc. So for that reason, I think he'd pretend to be on board with voting for Trent alongside Heather's alliance, but he's actually voting for Heather along with Lashana, Trent, and Gwen, while the other four vote for Trent as they think they have the majority. But of course, this is proven to not be the case, as the vote is tied 4-4. Heather insists there be a recount, but Chris tells her it won't change anything anyway. Heather demands an explanation for how a tie happened, glaring at Cody, which prompts him to explain, figuring there's no point in hiding. He admits to the entire team that he pretended to be on board with Heather's alliance and voting off Trent by playing up his simpage for Gwen, when in reality, he's loyal to Gwen and Trent over them because he believes they deserve to be happy. Gwen and Trent are amazed at how selfless, clever, and mature that is in separate confessionals. Now, I was gonna try and think of a tiebreaker which would most likely be related to the challenge, which really could go either way since Heather's physical prowess in challenges was never really shown in Island all that much, so she and Trent would be pretty even in a paintball match. However, I decided to do something a bit different, and had Chris decide that both of them would be getting eliminated. I'll get to how this affects the merge later on, but I think this not only makes things way more interesting, but also makes sense since Island didn't have any tiebreaker rounds. And I feel like Chris would be too lazy to come up with one this early in the game, especially. So instead, I think he just gets rid of both of them. Cody apologizes to Trent for not telling him about the ambush, but Trent tells him it's okay and that he did the right thing in the end, giving him a fist bump, while Heather just gives him the finger. Fiore is annoyed that her greatest ally is gone, but luckily for her, she still has the innocent facade going for her, and she can pass off working with Heather as simply being naive. Fiore actually has the idea to talk to Cody to get him into an alliance between the two of them, since she was impressed with his move last episode. Cody is unsure at first since this is kinda coming out of nowhere and they were just on opposing alliances, but Fiore seals the deal by fake crying and fabricating a story about how Heather bullied her into submission, and how heroic she thought Cody one-upping her was last night, telling him she thinks he's a great role model, hence why she wants to team up with him. This inflates Cody's ego to the moon, and since he has no reason to believe otherwise, he shakes on it with Fiore, since even though he likes Gwen, Trent, and Lashana, he knows that he probably can't rely on them to choose him over each other if it really came down to it in a vote. Junior joins in on the bullying against Harold since he's pretty close to Duncan, especially after Duncan told him not to care too much in general last episode, And at this point, Duncan has started to take a liking to him as a little brother almost. Because Heather isn't here anymore, Lashana becomes head chef and does a decent job. I would say she has roughly the same productivity as Heather, just without the bossiness or the wasted time shoving her in the freezer. However, none of that matters since Owen still eats their entire assortment of food, barring a crumb, giving the Killer Bass the win and getting Owen voted out by his entire team since no one else here is taking the heat off of him this time. So this challenge features 5 different rounds, and I was able to keep all the Killer Bass pairs the same, but for the Screaming Gophers, I just picked who I think Chris would pick to swap out the people who've not been voted out. Round 1 is Gwen and Heather versus Duncan and DJ. Cody replaces Heather, the Gophers still win. Cody and Gwen have a solid relationship despite Chris thinking otherwise, with Cody even apologizing to Gwen for Trent being gone, and Gwen not blaming him for it at all since he obviously did his best. Cody wouldn't rip Gwen's shorts, so she beats DJ by an even bigger margin now. Round 2 is Lindsay and Fiore versus Bridget and Jeff. The Bass still win, and instead of Trent getting poisoned, Fiore is smart enough to just forfeit since she knows they're going to lose either way with Lindsay's stupidity. Round 3 is Lashana and Gwen versus Sadie and Courtney. Gwen replaces Owen, so she's not as bulky as Owen, so taking apples to the face due to Lashana's blind aim would be tougher. But she's still a better shot than Sadie is with Courtney, so the Gophers still win another point. Round 4, Fiore replaces Heather again, and this time she doesn't forfeit and gets electrocuted since she doesn't want to bail on a challenge twice in a row, but ultimately still loses, which causes her to get extremely angry at Lindsay and just in general has her facade start to slip, slowly revealing her true colors this episode. Bass win a point and the score is 2-2. The final round stays exactly the same, Gophers win the match point, and Bass are sent to elimination, which also stays exactly the same with the majority, including Junior, voting off Sadie for her incompetence and also due to Courtney's wrath. Fiore and Junior would both hop on one another's shoulders to lift the canoe since they can't reach it with everyone else lifting it being way taller, which would make it impossible for them to compete. So Lindsay is still the first to bail. Because the main focus of this episode is still Duncan and Courtney's interactions, Junior would be spending time with other people. And because he'd be out of the challenge pretty early, and he might catch a glimpse of Duncan spending time with Courtney, he'd begin to rethink the whole I don't care approach, and actually build up the courage to ask Bridget out on a date. Bridget gives him a surprisingly stern no, which surprises Junior, since while he's not too surprised though disappointed that she didn't say yes, he figured she would at least be nice about it. After telling her this, Bridget tells him that normally she would be nice about it, and she was feeling kinda bad about having to let him down since she knew he had a crush on him since like episode 3, if not earlier. But because he bullied Harold alongside Duncan, she kind of views him as a bad egg now. This makes Junior genuinely feel pretty bad, that is until he sees Duncan and Courtney kiss this episode, which actually makes him angry, since in his mind, Duncan got rewarded for doing the same thing he did, while he gets scolded for it, which he thinks is totally unfair. Cody tries to keep Fiore from losing the challenge by staying by her side, but between all the pain endurance she's been going through recently and Chef yelling in her ear as a super strict authority figure, Fiore would genuinely snap and storm off, cursing out Chef in front of everybody, and completely drops the innocent little girl thing. Chef sends her to solitary confinement where she's eventually joined by Duncan, and they both decide to make a temporary alliance after learning how and why they both ended up there. Since obviously Cody's not going to help Fiore anymore, but Fiore still sneaks out before Courtney gets there to check on Duncan. So their dynamic still plays out the same. Anyway, Gwen still wins the challenge for her team, and the Killer Bass go to elimination. Now, the votes are kind of all over the place here. Junior and Bridget both vote for Duncan since even though they're not on good terms with each other, they both still dislike Duncan more now. Duncan, DJ, and Jeff and Courtney all still vote for Harold, and Harold still wants Courtney out as payback for Duncan's bullying. However, this time around, Katie actually approaches Harold before doing the deed, since she now also wants Courtney out for getting Sadie eliminated, which gives Harold even more motivation to cheat out Courtney, since now he knows he's not alone. So when Courtney is dragged onto the boat of losers, Katie taunts her and everyone else saying karma is just doing its job and that Courtney lost fair and square, despite knowing otherwise. Duncan pins the blame on Katie for getting rid of Courtney due to her open hostility during her competition, while Harold is completely in the clear as he thinks Harold is too pathetic to pull something like that. Junior joins Harold and Katie's axis of revenge as he's mad at both Duncan. Junior joins Harold and Katie's axis of revenge as he's mad at both Duncan and Bridget. Junior apologizes for bullying Harold and realizes that what he did was wrong, even though he didn't like how Bridget delivered the message. The two of them genuinely make amends, along with Katie, who also admits she could have been more receptive to people on her team outside of Sadie before she got eliminated. So for the challenge, we have 3 rounds. And for the first one, DJ still goes and Trent is replaced by Fiore in a random number generator. This seems like a really difficult jump to land since, it's jumping off of a plane onto a bed, and I don't see a reason why Fiore could pull that off or do any better than DJ, so Killer Bass still get a point here. Second challenge stays the same with Lashana beating Jeff in the moose riding. This leads to the final round with Lindsay still beating Duncan because of how much she wants that shower. and Harold would go up against Gwen instead of Heather, and since Gwen wouldn't try to cut Harold loose, being not as cutthroat as Heather, she doesn't end up topless and therefore never shows Harold her breasts, meaning Harold never gets distracted and manages to cross the finish line with all the flags. This means that the challenge ends in a draw. Now, originally I was going to have a normal challenge tiebreaker, but given that the episode would be running out of time by this point, I think Chris would actually decide to announce the merge an episode early and just send everyone to elimination, but give the people who won the individual challenges immunity, which includes DJ, Lashana, Harold, and Lindsay. I think Chris would do this since this is kinda similar to the hide and seek challenge immunity system, which happens just a few episodes later anyway. Now, even though Harold did eventually feel kinda guilty about rigging the votes against Courtney eventually, he has no reason to confess since it's only been one episode later, and on top of that, he's made a new alliance and the bullying seems to have been redistributed to Duncan's misdirected anger at Katie, which really works in his favor, so I think Harold keeps his mouth shut. For now. Like I said, Duncan still thinks Katie was responsible for Courtney, so he, along with Jeff and DJ, vote for her, while Harold, Junior, and Katie all obviously vote for Duncan. Bridget also votes for Katie since even though she dislikes Duncan, Courtney was her friend and she has no reason not to believe it was Katie's fault. This 4-3 split really leaves the outcome up to the Screaming Gophers. And since that whole team all like each other with the exception of Fiore, they agree to come together here. Fiore is actually the one to suggest this, and sells the idea by saying even though they know her true colors, it makes more sense to vote out a bigger threat and keep themselves safe. And even though they don't know too much about the Killer Bass's drama and dynamics, Harold, now feeling much more confident in himself, would reveal his true feelings to Lashana before the elimination publicly, shocking Gwen and Bridget like in the original, as they sort of become a thing like in the original, though more so a fling than a full-on relationship. But this new connection also gives Harold an excuse to tell Lashana all about what's going on with his team. And I think both of them would let Fiore, and by proxy, the rest of the Gophers in on the plan to vote Duncan out for being the biggest threat to the Gophers. And because of this, Duncan gets a total of 8 votes, including Gwen since she didn't really get to be friendly with him yet before the merge anyway. Duncan is shocked and infuriated at this upset, and would threaten Katie and tell her this isn't over. And he swears revenge for Courtney. But Harold stands up for Katie and publicly reveals that he was in fact the one who rigged the votes against her, and that he would do it all again just to stick it to Duncan if he could. Duncan's face turns red and is ready to strangle Harold with his bare hands, but all he can do is give him a swift kick to the nuts before Chef throws him off the island and onto the boat of losers. And no, I don't think Harold gets auto-eliminated even after admitting this. In a later season maybe, especially if we were talking about Redonkulous Race, but Chris is no stranger to bending the rules, especially in season 1 where he admitted to knowing what Harold did at the beginning of this episode originally anyway. Not to mention, Lashana's elimination, blatantly lying about there being no returning contestants, etc. Junior and Harold are both happy about Duncan being gone, even though DJ and Jeff kinda miss him. And they all get along with Cody fine enough. Fiore knows the jig is up, so she suggests forming a permanent girls alliance even after Chris lifts the gender swap team, in order to give all of them numbers, although really it's just to save her own skin. And again, even though they don't like her, they admit it's a good idea to target the other guys who are bigger threats. The only girl who's not on board is Katie, since she already has a pact with Junior and Harold, but without Sadie there, she doesn't feel comfortable not going along with the crowd, so she pretends to be in anyway. As for the challenge, the girls win because without Owen here, no one stands a chance against Lashana in the eating competition, and that's if they even get to the tiebreaker to begin with before the girls win, so yeah. Now, because we have 11 people left this time instead of 12, I decided Chris would only bring back one person instead of 2. But I don't think it would be Eva or Izzy this time. Izzy seemed like more of an afterthought to fill up space, and although Chris really liked the idea of increasing conflict by adding Eva back in, I think he'd actually choose Justin this time instead. The reason I think this is because A, Chris admires Justin and even said he personally thought he shouldn't have lost to Heather, who isn't even here anymore, and B, with a 6-to-5 ratio of girls to guys and the girls already making an alliance, he wouldn't want to make the competition feel too lopsided, and adding in another really strong female competitor might just cause an issue with that. Justin has a confessional stating he plans on playing a much more strategic game this time, and he's not going to let anyone push him around. Not that it matters for this challenge, because if Eva couldn't beat Lashana here, there's no way in hell anyone else is doing that. Justin might be able to charm dangerous animals out of harming him, but eventually he's going to get something where Chef just torments him, which he'll quit immediately, so as to not damage his model form. So Lashana wins the nice trailer along with immunity, and because no one knows about the Girls Alliance yet, I think that all of them vote off Harold for admitting to cheating, since they don't want to risk being next, except for Lashana and Katie since they have connections to him. All the guys besides Junior also vote for Harold for the same reason, which gives him 8 votes total, and despite the friends he made, they aren't enough to counter it. So he goes home with his head held high and roots for Lashana, Katie, and Junior to make it to the end. Before the pirate challenge, the girls would figure out that Lashana and Katie didn't stay true to their alliance during the vote, which they admit but don't care because they never actually agreed to it, so the girls' alliance fractures instantly afterwards. All of Harold's friends band together in his honor with no reason not to anymore, and I think Junior could convince Cody to tag along too, since he and Junior probably get along well and could help each other out in the challenge. And Cody needs a new alliance member anyway after Fiore didn't work out and his team disbanded. I'm gonna say Justin wins immunity here since this episode was clearly just giving it to the antagonist with plot armor, who in this case is probably Justin, although I guess that's admittedly debatable, but whatever. Anyway, Junior wants to vote off Bridget since he's still mad at her for shunning her the way she did. Cody, Lashana, and Katie all privately agree that it's kind of a pathetic and spiteful reason to go by, but strategically also agree to do it anyway, so she gets 4 votes. Fiore wants revenge on Lashana for bailing on the Girls Alliance, so she, Lindsay, and Bridget all vote for her, and they get Justin on board too, since even though his charm does seem to work on Lashana, she's still a pretty big physical threat, so yeah. As for Gwen, Jeff, and DJ, I don't know. I doubt Gwen votes for Lashana or Bridget since she likes both of them. DJ probably votes for Fiore, I guess. And while you could argue that Jeff would join Bridget along in the vote for Lashana, I have a feeling he's more likely to vote for Justin since, his charm works on all the women and he's into Bridget, so, he might get a little bit jealous there. Regardless of the last few votes, the end result is a 4-4 draw between Lashana and Bridget, and Chris isn't going to do a double elimination twice. Instead, he'll have to come up with a tiebreaker at the elimination ceremony, and regardless of what it is, I think it's safe to say Lashana's going to win just about anything that isn't surfing, so Bridget is sent home. Jeff kisses her goodbye, and Junior is satisfied in confessional at her elimination. Jeff is still really sad about Bridget going home, so for the hide and be sneaky challenge, he's probably the first one to get caught by Chef immediately. Lashana still wins immunity with the underwater hiding spot. Everyone else can only get immunity by catching other people. Justin can easily do this by persuading Lindsay and Katie into helping them out, but DJ would stay on the roof without Owen there to fight him for the spot. Cody would find a decent hiding spot, so when Chef catches him, it's late enough into the challenge that no one else can use him. Gwen also still gets caught by Chef, and Junior and Fiore would both try to hide in the same small nook and fight each other for it, which just gets Chef to catch both of them as well. So Lashana and Justin have immunity, everyone else is fair game. Katie, Lashana, Junior, and Cody all vote for Fiore with no one else to really target, but Fiore knows about that, so she decides to talk to Justin and tell him she's immune to his charm, since flattery doesn't work on her, which sends Justin into a panic as he's forced to use his brain, which he says in front of her he really doesn't know how to do. Fiore says, "Don't worry, leave all the thinking to me, and you can have your quote-unquote pretty face." Justin asks why Fiore said it like that, and Fiore walks off reminding him not to think about it too hard. The two of them combine their powers of persuasion to get Junior out, since of the alliance, Lashana is immune, and Fiore is angry at Junior for messing with her hiding spot. The way they do this for each person goes like this. Lindsay and Gwen can be persuaded by Justin's beauty, even though Gwen is a little more resistant to it than Lindsay. It's still been shown to distract her before. Jeff is an easy one, since it was Junior's idea to get Bridget voted out with his alliance in the first place, so Jeff would want to do this to get back at him. And DJ, they could just say that Junior lost his way or something and that he should go home to his mom, I don't know. Something like that. Junior is sad to go, but he's proud that he made it this far and wishes his alliance members good luck going forward. I'm not going to go through who makes each person's bike since that's way too convoluted, so instead I'll just go through what I think changes. Lashana competes without Izzy kidnapping her the whole episode, but she still doesn't make it past the first round due to lack of agility. DJ and Gwen didn't make it past the first round either, and Justin and Fiore don't have the capacity to make it either. However, Lindsay was originally shown to be really good at this challenge, even without Heather there. And of everyone here, I believe both Katie and Cody would manage to squeeze through the first set of booby traps and go on to the sudden death round, making it between Lindsay, Katie, and Cody. Now, like I said, Lindsay was really good at this challenge, and without Heather using her, she easily takes first place, which means it comes down to either Cody or Katie for last. And this was tough, but I ultimately decided Cody would finish slightly earlier because maybe he can do the thing he did in Dodgeball with the weird boomerang ball, and come up with something similar to deflect some of the obstacles. This means that Katie gets third, and after Chris explains the BS rules, she is auto-eliminated, with everyone giving her their goodbyes since no one thought it was a fair elimination. Despite the very different cast than the original, this is the first episode in a while that really doesn't change much at all. No one besides DJ would be scared of horror movies, everyone still gets got one by one without Duncan there to disarm Chef, and Gwen still wins meaningless immunity by defeating the real chainsaw killer with a hook, and DJ is auto-eliminated for being the worst survivor. Justin gets his animal in the cage first easily, with Gwen going second. This is where Fiore feels the need to shake things up a bit and creates a fake love letter forging Cody's signature, pretending he secretly had it out for Trent the whole time and has always been playing the long game to win Gwen over. When confronted, Cody insists he's being framed, but Gwen doesn't believe him, and when she tells Lashana, she spreads the word and convinces everyone Cody's a two-faced creep and he gets voted off. It isn't until after the elimination that it's revealed that Fiore made the whole thing up. Gwen and Lashana apologize to Cody for taking the bait, but he says it's okay and just tells them to kick Fiore's ass. The pairs for this episode are as follows: Gwen and Jeff, Lashana and Lindsay, Justin and Fiore. The first round goes to Gwen and Jeff. Again, without Owen here, Gwen would be feeding Jeff. I think he would be the fastest eater. You could make a case for Lashana, but her partner is Lindsay, who probably wouldn't be very good at feeding or eating, so I think that Gwen and Jeff beat them here. And Justin and Fiore, she's a child, and he's probably not a very good eater because, you know, body insecurity. Gwen and Jeff also win the second round because they won that in the original, and Lashana and Lindsay are the ones to win the third round, because even though Lindsay's not very smart, she does probably remember people well, and Lashana was part of the winning duo in the original, so yeah. Now, I know that originally only one of these teams got immunity, but because the third round happens after the first two, and Gwen and Jeff already won the first two, I feel like it would make more sense to give Lashana and Lindsay immunity as well. And it would more so just be like a, if you win a round, you get an immunity sort of thing. Again, I know I'm bending the rules here, but that kind of thing happens in Season 1 a lot, so. This means that the eliminated contestant is between Justin and Fiore. Now, you might think Fiore is cooked, but remember that even with Heather vulnerable, the majority voted out Jeff in fear of him winning a popularity contest. And since Jeff is now immune, and Justin is beloved on the level of a borderline demigod, I think most, if not all of their votes are on him now. Justin leaves frustrated, but is at least happy with the reason he lost being his gorgeous face. To the point where he's not even that upset about Fiore's betrayal, he's just kind of like, yeah, whatever. Once again, there isn't too much that changes here. Harold still gets hunted down by both Courtney and Duncan now, and beyond that, everyone just talks about who they want to win. Mostly just Gwen and Jeff, with maybe a little Lashana and Lindsay sprinkled in there, and absolutely no Fiore. As much as I hate it, there's no reason for me to change the elimination with Katie and Sadie still here, especially now that Katie was actually allied with Lashana for a bit, so now the bullshit elimination has even more of a reason to happen. This is just filler. Jeff finds Mr. Coconut instead of Owen, everyone else confesses their sins, whatever, moving on. The two teams in the woods are now Gwen and Fiore versus Jeff and Lindsay. The former team obviously won being much smarter and having a better sense of direction. They can also just trick Jeff and Lindsay since Gwen is friends with him and Lindsay is dumb. And I sorta already went over this in my island video. Given the choice, I think Chef would choose to eliminate Lindsay over Jeff since Lindsay was the first to quit in basics training, and he would probably view Jeff as a more respectable competitor. Unless someone like Duncan, who actively pisses him off, is an option, he would pick who he thinks is weaker or deserves to be there less. So Lindsay is eliminated. By the way, I know some people say that this was a regular vote and Chef just announced it rather than decided it, but if that was the case, the show did not make that clear at all, and frankly, I find it more interesting for Chef to choose as it adds an extra layer of suspense in my opinion. So that's what I'm sticking to. As I've said in previous videos, it's impossible to tell who gets what dare and whatnot, so I simply go by who I believe has the lowest tolerance level for these gross and brutal dares. And while everyone here is pretty decent, the obvious loser is Fiore. Gwen drank from the communal toilet, and Jeff dove into the toilet before with a scuba mask for a long period of time. I don't think Fiore is beating that, especially if she gets double teamed, which is probably going to happen sooner or later. This finale really isn't all that different from the original. Jeff would offer to throw a huge party just like Owen did, so most of the people support him. While Gwen gets most of the same supporters she did in the original, I don't remember if Bridget was with her or not, but since Jeff is here, obviously she would support him. Trent still moves the rock for Gwen. Heather probably doesn't put laxatives in the cupcake anymore. And the only real difference here is that because Jeff can't get the brownie boost like Owen is able to, Gwen probably gets the canon ending while Jeff gets the alternate one. And yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This was pretty interesting to write. I thought it was kind of interesting how the middle was the part that shifted the most, while the beginning and the end were pretty similar to the original. But yeah, I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to get everything out, but I do have a video coming out soon that's going to go over future plans, as I have a lot of Total Drama videos planned. But who knows, maybe another one will come out sooner rather than later. Either way, see you then.